Hello everyone, welcome to this trigonometry problem. This is a small question. We are asked to verify this equality: tangent x over 1 minus cotangent x plus cotangent x over 1 minus tangent x is equal to 1 plus sec x plus cosec x. Okay, so when we have this one, we have to prove that the quantity on the left yields the quantity on the right. So we are going to analyze the quantity on the left. Okay, so in the next slide we are going to work on that. So the question was, on the first side we had tangent x over 1 minus cotangent x plus cotangent x over 1 plus 1 minus tangent x. So we are going to develop this. We know tangent x is sine x over cosine x, and cotangent x is cos x over sine x. So on the first part we have tangent x is sine x over cosine x. Now the cosine comes to the denominator with the quantity 1 minus cotangent x, 1 minus cos x over sine x. Okay, so that's the first part, plus now cotangent x is cos x, cosine x over sine x. Now the sine x is going to multiply the denominator, and we have 1 minus sine x over cosine x. So we are going to develop the second part, the second side, and first we are going to work on the denominator. So what we are getting here is first sine x over cosine x multiplying. Now we have to put this on the same denominator, so sine x minus cosine x all over sine x. Now the denominator of a denominator is a numerator, so we are going to send that sine x to the numerator, so times sine x. Okay, we're going to get the second one here, and it will be cosine x over sine x multiplying cosine x minus sine x. The same way, this cosine x on this denominator here goes to the numerator, so it becomes cosine x times cosine x on the numerator, and we continue. So sine x times sine x is sine squared of x, and then over cosine x times sine x minus cosine x, should be parenthesis not bracket here, plus cosine squared x over sine x times cosine x minus sine x. Okay, so we continue, and here we have to find the common denominator. The common is sine x times cosine x times sine x minus cos x, if we do some work here. So we have sine x squared times sine x over cosine x times sine x minus cosine x numeric times sine x. I'm going to correct this. Now minus cosine square x times the cosine x to get the same common denominator over sine. Okay, I'm just correcting this one here to get the same common denominator. So sine x times sine x minus cosine x times cosine x. So I introduce the negative sign to compensate to have the same common denominator. So we get sine cube of x minus cosine cube of x over sine x cosine x multiplying sine x minus cosine x. This is what we get now. Okay, now we are going to develop this. Okay, you can see the numerator is an identity. Okay, so we get sine cube x minus cosine cube x on the numerator. Let's develop that. It is the form of a cubed minus b cubed. You know, it is a minus b times a squared plus ab plus b squared. So we get sine x minus cosine x times sine squared x plus sine x cosine x plus cosine squared x. Okay, but here we have an identity. Look at that part, sine squared x plus cosine squared x. We know that is a trigonometric identity. Sine squared x plus cosine squared x is equal to 1. Okay, so we get 1 here. Okay, so we get sine cube x minus cosine cube x is equal to sine x minus cosine x times quantity 1 plus sine x cosine x. Okay, now we get the full expression that becomes sine cube x minus cosine cube x over sine x cosine x factoring sine x minus cosine x becomes 1 plus sine x cosine x, or sine x cosine, okay, 1 plus sine x cosine x times sine x minus cosine x, everything over sine x cosine x, sine x cosine x times sine x minus cosine x. So we can simplify sine x minus cosine x here. Okay, now we are left with the small quantity. So the expression becomes 1, or we could say sine x cosine x plus 1 over sine x cosine x. We can break this. We get sine x cosine x over sine x cosine x plus 1 over sine x cosine x. You can see the first term here becomes 1. Sine x cosine x over sine x cosine x. This is 1. Now everything becomes we get 1 plus 1 over sine x times 1 over cosine x, okay, which is what we were looking for. 1 plus 1 over cosine x is secant x, and times is cosecant x, cosec x. So this was the item we were looking for, the expression we were looking for, so it has been verified. Okay, thank you for watching this.